The air inside Judge William Hawthorne's courtroom was thick, heavy with the weight of decades-old authority. The dark wood paneling, the echo of shifting papers, and the occasional metallic clang of handcuffs against the bench all told the same story. This was not a place for second chances. Hawthorne had been on this bench for 30 years, long enough to carve his reputation into the very walls. He was the law in this room, at least, that's what he believed. So when Maya Carter, a 19-year-old black woman, was escorted before him, he barely looked up. Another one. Another young troublemaker wasting his time, another case he could handle in his sleep. Same routine, different defendant. Maya stood silently in the defendant's spot, wearing simple jeans and a fitted navy blazer, her natural curls framing her face. She had a calmness about her, too calm for someone standing trial. That alone made Hawthorne pause for half a second before pushing the thought away. If you want to see more powerful stories like this, make sure to hit that subscribe button and join our community on rvmblackstruggles. Your support helps bring these important stories to life. He flipped through the file without much effort. Interfering with police business. Resisting arrest. He didn't need the details. He already knew how this would end. His fingers drummed lazily against the bench as he adjusted his glasses. The prosecutor, David Callahan, barely lifted his head from his notes. This was an easy win. But was it? Let us know what you think. If you like where this story is going, comment 1. If it's not your style, comment 0. And if you're not sure yet, why not subscribe and find out? Miss Carter, Hawthorne drawled, his tone dripping with casual condescension, stretching out her name like an inconvenience. Let's not waste any more of the court's time, shall we? Maya didn't move. Didn't blink. Unbothered. That alone irritated him. Hawthorne sighed dramatically, shifting in his chair. You were arrested for resisting arrest, interfering with a police investigation, standard procedure. He waved a dismissive hand. Frankly, it doesn't matter why. You were given a lawful order and didn't comply. That's a problem. Like, share, and spread awareness, because stories like these deserve to be heard. Subscribe to rvmblackstruggles now to stay updated on more eye-opening narratives. From the back, a few quiet chuckles rippled through the gallery, mostly from officers who had arrested her, their arms crossed in smug amusement. The prosecutor still hadn't bothered to lift his head. Maya stood stone-faced. Hawthorne tilted his head, his patience already wearing thin. Miss Carter, do you think this is a joke? Finally, she spoke. Clear. Calm. Measured. No, Your Honor. Her voice held no fear, no uncertainty. It was enough to make even Callahan glance up, momentarily interested. Hawthorne raised an eyebrow. Then I suggest you show some respect for this court. He leaned forward, lacing his fingers together as he delivered the line that always hit hardest. Maybe if you had paid more attention in school, you wouldn't be standing here today. The words cut through the room like a blade, sharp and deliberate. Silence. The kind that stretched long enough to make people shift uncomfortably in their seats. Even the quiet murmuring stopped. Callahan's pen froze mid-scribble. The officers at the door exchanged quick glances. Hawthorne smirked, pleased with himself. He had seen this 1,000 times: intimidate them, put them in their place, and move on. But Maya Carter did not flinch. Instead, she took a slow, measured breath and reached into her bag. Immediately, the two bailiffs stiffened, one hand instinctively moving toward his holster. Hawthorne rolled his eyes. Oh, for God's sake, what? But he stopped. Because the moment she pulled the sleek black leather case from her bag, flipping it open with a practiced ease, the entire courtroom shifted. Time froze. Inside the case was something that did not belong in the hands of a 19-year-old defendant. A state-issued bar card. The kind that only licensed attorneys carried. For the first time, Judge Hawthorne didn't have a response. The officer stiffened, suddenly uncertain. The prosecutor Callahan sat up straighter, flipping through his files with urgency. The smirk vanished from Hawthorne's face. Maya placed the card on the defense table and tapped it once, lightly, with her index finger. Then, with absolute certainty, she said, Your Honor, I did pay attention in school. That's why I graduated law school at 18, passed the bar on my first attempt, and I'm here today. Undercover, investigating you. For the first time in Judge William Hawthorne's 30-year career, he was speechless. The words hung in the air, freezing the entire courtroom in place. Undercover. Investigating you. It was a knockout punch he had never seen coming. The moment stretched, heavy and suffocating, like the room itself was struggling to process what had just happened. The courtroom, once a place where Hawthorne dictated every outcome, was now slipping from his grasp. Maya stood completely still, her bar card resting on the defense table, its polished surface glistening under the courtroom lights. No one moved. No one spoke. Even the court reporters, who had been mechanically typing every word, had paused, as if unsure whether what they had just heard was real. Judge Hawthorne's jaw tightened, his fingers digging into the arms of his chair. He flicked his gaze between Maya and the small leather case on the table, as if willing it to disappear. But it didn't. This is ridiculous. His voice sounded different now. Less authoritative. Less certain. His grip on control was slipping, and he knew it. The prosecutor, David Callahan, had finally lifted his head, his normally apathetic demeanor now replaced with thinly veiled panic. He scrambled for his laptop, fingers flying over the keyboard. "Your Honor." Callahan began, his voice strained, her credentials check out. It was like setting off a bomb in the room. A collective gasp rippled through the audience. The gallery erupted into whispers and hushed conversations, people leaning in, wide-eyed. The officers standing near the door exchanged stiff glances, their earlier smirks completely wiped from their faces. The bailiffs, who had reflexively stepped forward moments earlier, now hesitated, waiting for a cue that wasn't coming. Judge Hawthorne felt something he hadn't felt in decades, powerless. But he wasn't about to back down. Not here. Not in his courtroom. He sat up straighter, masking his unease with forced authority. "This is highly inappropriate," he snapped. "You come into my courtroom with some absurd claim, expecting what? That I'll roll over and..." Maya didn't even blink. Instead, she reached into her bag again. This time, the officers tensed further, muscles coiling, as if expecting something more dangerous than paper. But that's exactly what she pulled out, a thin, neatly prepared folder. She laid it flat on the table, tapping it twice. "This," she said, her voice steady, "is the body cam transcript from the officers who arrested me." Hawthorne's eye twitched. Callahan froze mid-scroll, his mouth slightly open. Maya continued, unfazed. "It shows that I asked exactly one question before I was handcuffed. What's the charge?" Silence. Dead silence. Hawthorne's lips pressed into a tight line, his nostrils flaring. Maya slid the folder toward the bailiff, her movements slow, deliberate, a quiet dare for someone to stop her. The bailiff, to his credit, hesitated only briefly before picking up the file and handing it to the judge. Hawthorne snatched it with more force than necessary, flipping it open. His eyes scanned the first few lines, then stopped. His jaw clenched. Because there it was. In black and white. The only thing Maya Carter had done was ask a question. And that was not a crime. Maya's voice broke the silence, calm, methodical. "Your Honor, the Supreme Court has ruled that speech alone does not constitute obstruction unless it directly interferes with law enforcement actions." She paused, watching his face darken. "Asking a question is not a crime." The gallery stirred again, louder this time. People sat forward in their seats, eyes locked on the young woman who was shaking the very foundation of the courtroom. Hawthorne's fingers tightened around the folder, his knuckles turning white. "That's not for you to decide." Maya tilted her head slightly. "It already has been decided, Your Honor." Her voice was sharp, unwavering, filled with quiet confidence that made Hawthorne's pulse spike. Houston v. Hill, 1987. The Supreme Court held that individuals have the right to verbally challenge police officers without fear of arrest. "Would you like me to cite additional cases?" A murmur of unease swept through the room. Hawthorne's face darkened further. His gavel hovered over his desk, but he didn't slam it down. Because he knew she was right. Because he knew he had already lost control. And worse, everyone in the courtroom knew it too. Judge William Hawthorne sat rigid in his seat, staring at the stack of papers Maya Carter had just presented. His grip tightened around the folder, his knuckles whitening as the weight of her words pressed down on him like a judge's own gavel. The room was still, yet charged with energy, a strange mix of disbelief, curiosity, and something else, the unmistakable scent of a reckoning. Hawthorne cleared his throat, forcing his voice back to the surface. "This is absurd. A stunt. A desperate attempt for attention. That's all this is." But he wasn't just trying to convince the courtroom. He was trying to convince himself. Maya remained unmoved. Instead, she reached into her bag again, her movements slow, deliberate. A controlled defiance. Daring anyone to stop her. Hawthorne's fingers twitched over his gavel. But she didn't pull out a phone or another bar card this time. Instead, she placed another folder onto the table. This one was thicker. Heavier. She flipped it open and turned it toward the courtroom. "Your Honor," she said, "I took the liberty of reviewing your past rulings over the last 10 years. A cold sliver of silence sliced through the room. Hawthorne's jaw tightened. Callahan, The prosecutor stiffened visibly. The audience shifted forward, sensing something explosive coming. Maya pulled out the first page and read aloud. 5 years ago, a white college student was arrested for disorderly conduct and resisting arrest. You dismissed the charges, citing youthful indiscretion. A murmur rippled through the gallery. Maya turned to the next page. That same year, a black high school senior, same charges, same circumstances, was sentenced to 60 days in county jail. The murmur grew louder. Hawthorne gritted his teeth. Maya flipped to another page. White defendant. Possession of marijuana. First offense. You ordered probation. She held up the next document. Black defendant. Same charge. First offense. You gave him 3 years. A low whistle escaped from someone in the gallery. Even the bailiffs, normally stoic and detached, shifted uncomfortably. Hawthorne's gavel slammed down. Enough. But the crack of the wood did nothing to silence the room. The courtroom wasn't his anymore. It belonged to her. Maya leaned forward, her voice quiet but razor-sharp. No, Your Honor. It's not enough. Hawthorne's face burned red. He turned to Callahan, his prosecutor, his safety net, for backup. Well? He demanded. You have anything to say about this nonsense? Callahan hesitated. His loyalty to Hawthorne was wavering, and everyone could see it. For years, he had stood by this judge, defending his rulings, brushing aside concerns. But now, the whole world was watching. If he stood with Hawthorne, he'd go down with him. His fingers fumbled on the keyboard, desperately searching for an out. But there was none. Your Honor. Callahan finally said, his voice lower, strained. The numbers, her evidence, it's accurate. The room exploded. Gasps. Whispers. The clicking of journalist keyboards as they furiously typed what would soon become national headlines. Hawthorne's lips pressed into a tight, thin line. His face paled, his mask of confidence cracking before the very people he once ruled over. Maya wasn't done. This isn't an isolated pattern, Your Honor. This is a career-long practice of judicial bias. She reached for another folder, placing it in the center of the defense table. This is a statistical breakdown of your sentencing disparities. Hawthorne's nostrils flared. This is not relevant to today's hearing, he snapped. Maya didn't blink. It is if you intend to rule against me, she countered. Hawthorne's chest rose and fell unevenly. For the first time since the proceedings began, the judge had no immediate response. And then Maya delivered the final blow. She pulled out one last sheet of paper. She held it up for the courtroom to see. This is a formal complaint filed with the Judicial Conduct Board last month. She let that sink in before continuing. Multiple attorneys have alleged bias in your rulings. Her eyes locked onto his, unwavering. And guess what, Your Honor? She laid the paper flat on the table. This case, my case, was flagged as part of their review. For the first time in his career, Judge William Hawthorne felt something he had never felt before. Fear. Not just for his reputation. Not just for his authority. But for something far, far worse. Because for the first time ever, justice was coming for him. Judge William Hawthorne sat motionless, his mind racing as the courtroom spun around him. The sound of whispers grew louder, like an encroaching storm. He could feel his authority slipping, the very foundation of his power cracking beneath him. For the first time in 30 years, he wasn't in control. His grip tightened around his gavel, the cold wood pressing against his palm. He had handled thousands of cases, broken countless defendants with just his words. But now he was the one on trial. And Maya Carter knew it. She stood tall, unwavering, her presence commanding the room in a way that should have been impossible for someone so young. Hawthorne cleared his throat, desperate to regain control. This is outrageous, he growled, slamming his gavel down for emphasis. A blatant attack on the judicial system. Do you think you can just waltz into my courtroom and... Your courtroom? Maya cut in, tilting her head slightly. Her voice was soft. Too soft. It made the interruption sting even more. Hawthorne stiffened. The tension in the room thickened. With all due respect, Your Honor, she continued, taking a deliberate step closer to the defense table, this courtroom does not belong to you. It belongs to the people. Gasps rippled through the spectators. Even the bailiffs, normally silent fixtures in the room, exchanged uneasy glances. Hawthorne felt heat crawl up his neck. This girl, this child, was challenging him. He leaned forward, his voice dipping into something dangerously low. Watch yourself, Miss Carter. Are you threatening me, Your Honor? The room held its breath. The words hung between them, thick and unavoidable. For the first time, Hawthorne realized the cameras were rolling. The courtroom was packed with reporters. Their fingers raced across keyboards, capturing every second of this spectacle. And it was a spectacle. A highly respected judge, known for his authority, his unshakable rulings, was being dismantled in real time by a 19-year-old attorney. And he couldn't stop it. "I am simply stating that this is highly inappropriate," Hawthorne spat, voice tight with anger. "I will not allow my courtroom to be turned into a circus." Maya remained unmoved. Instead, she lifted the thick folder and slid it forward. "Then let's focus on the facts." Hawthorne hesitated. "Go ahead, Your Honor. Read it." His fingers hovered over the folder like it was poison. He didn't want to. He already knew what was inside. He already knew what she had found. And so did the public. The air in the room shifted again. Just like it had earlier, when she revealed her bar card. The gallery was no longer watching a defendant plead her case. They were watching a judge squirm. For the first time, he was the one being questioned. Maya's voice cut through the thick silence. "Over the past 10 years, you have sentenced black defendants to an average of 2.7 times the sentence length given to white defendants charged with the same crime." Boom. The words hit like a gavel strike. A collective murmur swept through the audience. "In multiple cases, you dismissed charges entirely for white college students while handing out felony convictions to black teenagers for identical offenses." Another hit. Callahan, the prosecutor, shifted uncomfortably. "One case in particular stands out," Maya continued, pulling out a separate sheet. "The case of Marcus Warren." A woman in the gallery sucked in a sharp breath. Maya's eyes flicked toward her briefly, but she continued. "A black high school senior. No prior record. Arrested for disorderly conduct after a minor altercation at school. No weapons, no injuries, no history of violence." She paused. "You sentenced him to 10 years. Another gasp from the gallery. Maya held up the next page. "Same year, different case. Trevor Garrison. A white college student. Arrested for disorderly conduct after getting into a bar fight that resulted in a broken jaw for the victim." She turned the page over and placed it on the table. "You dismissed his charges." Dead silence. Not even the shuffling of papers. Not even the clicking of keyboards. The woman in the gallery, the one who had gasped earlier, now had tears in her eyes. Maya's voice softened. "That woman sitting in the back? That's Marcus Warren's sister." The camera panned to the woman, capturing the raw emotion in her face. Hawthorne's stomach twisted. His gavel hovered above his desk. But he couldn't bring himself to slam it down. Because it wouldn't change a thing. The truth was already out. Maya placed both hands on the table and leaned in slightly. "So tell me, Your Honor. Was that justice?" Hawthorne couldn't speak. His pulse pounded in his ears, drowning out the whispers, the murmurs, the weight of every decision he had ever made. Because for the first time in his entire career, he was the one being judged. For the first time in his 30-year reign, Judge William Hawthorne had no words. The courtroom wasn't his anymore. It belonged to her. Maya Carter stood tall, her presence commanding in a way that defied her age. The entire room was hanging on to her every word, waiting for the judge to respond, to explain himself, to do something. But he didn't. Because what could he say? The evidence was there, laid out before him like a slow, ticking bomb. "Was that justice, Your Honor?" The words echoed in the silence. Hawthorne clenched his jaw, his knuckles bone wide as they gripped the edge of the bench. His heartbeat pounded in his ears. The reporters were writing furiously, their fingers racing over keyboards. Even Callahan, his own prosecutor, his longtime ally in this courtroom, refused to meet his eyes. For the first time, he was completely alone. Hawthorne's pulse spiked with anger. No. He would not go down like this. "This is nothing more than a smear campaign," he snapped, slamming his gavel down, his voice thick with forced authority. "A courtroom is no place for theatrics, Miss Carter. I will not sit here and allow you to disrespect this court with baseless accusations and emotional manipulation." But nobody was fooled. Nobody. The gallery wasn't laughing anymore. The police officers who once stood smugly near the door were now exchanging nervous glances. The air had changed. They could feel it. "Baseless accusations?" Maya repeated, lifting her eyebrow. She flipped to another page in the thick folder before her. "Your Honor, let's talk about the case of Jennifer Mason." A beat of silence. Hawthorne's stomach dropped. Maya held up a document for the room to see. Jennifer Mason. White. 19 years old. Arrested for shoplifting over $3,000 worth of merchandise from a department store. First-time offense. Your ruling? Case dismissed. No record. No fine. No probation. No jail time. She pulled another document. Meanwhile, 2 months later, a black teenager, Jamal Brooks, same age, same first-time offense, stealing less than $100 worth of goods, and you sentenced him to 2 years in prison. The room exploded in gasps. Callahan visibly tensed. The reporters' fingers flew faster over their keyboards. Hawthorne's face reddened, but Maya wasn't done. "Your Honor, this isn't just a pattern." She placed yet another folder on the table. "This is systemic bias. This is corruption." The tension was suffocating. Hawthorne's breath came short, fast. He knew what came next. And so did everyone else. "Enough," he bellowed, his voice cracking under the weight of the moment. "I will not sit here and be humiliated in my own courtroom. I am the judge, and I will not tolerate this." Maya took a single step forward. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. "No, Your Honor," she said, locking eyes with him. "You are the one on trial today." A wave of gasps and murmurs swept the room. A reporter's camera flashed. A court officer near the back reached for his radio. Something was happening. And Hawthorne could feel it. The sound of heavy footsteps approached from outside the courtroom doors. Then, the doors swung open with a force that rattled the walls. 2 uniformed men entered, their presence like an omen. The State Commission on Judicial Conduct. The ones who oversaw complaints against sitting judges. The ones who could strip Hawthorne of his seat, his authority, his career. The lead officer, stern-faced, stepped forward. The courtroom fell into a dead silence. Everyone was watching, waiting. Hawthorne's mouth opened, but no words came out. Maya Carter had done the impossible. She had turned his courtroom against him. And now, he was the one being judged. For a long, agonizing moment, no one moved. No one spoke. The entire courtroom stood frozen, as if the weight of the moment had knocked the very breath from its walls. Judge William Hawthorne, once untouchable, sat rigid in his chair, his usually sharp blue eyes now wide with something dangerously close to fear. The 2 officers from the State Commission on Judicial Conduct stood in the doorway, their presence unmistakable. They weren't here for a casual review. They were here for him. Maya Carter remained unshaken. She had seen men like him before. Men who thought their power made them invincible. Who had spent their lives believing they were above the system they claimed to uphold. And now, the system had finally caught up with him. "Judge Hawthorne," the lead official announced, his voice firm, unwavering. "Due to the ongoing investigation into multiple judicial complaints, you are hereby placed on immediate suspension pending further review." Chaos erupted. The gallery exploded into gasps, whispers, and the frantic clicking of keyboards as reporters fought to be the first to break the news. Hawthorne's face drained of color. "This couldn't be happening. You have no right to barge into my courtroom like this." Hawthorne barked, his voice a desperate attempt at regaining control. "This is my court. I am a sitting judge. Not anymore." Maya's words were like a final gavel strike. Hawthorne's breath caught in his throat. She wasn't gloating. She wasn't even smiling. She was simply stating the truth. The officer stepped closer. "Judge Hawthorne, I suggest you step down from the bench voluntarily. If you refuse, we will be forced to remove you." The judge's gavel hovered uselessly in his grip, his fingers clutching it so tightly that his knuckles turned white. His eyes darted to Callahan, the prosecutor who had stood by him for years. A lifeline. A desperate plea. But Callahan didn't move. Didn't say a word. His face was blank, unreadable, but in his silence, Hawthorne saw the truth. He was alone. No more allies. No more unquestioned power. He had ruled over thousands of lives, and now, his own fate was being decided before a crowd of witnesses. Maya took a single step forward, lowering her voice just enough that only he could hear her next words. "This isn't just about me. This is about every person who sat in this courtroom and never stood a chance." Hawthorne's chest heaved. His throat tightened. For years, he had handed out sentences without a second thought. And now, he was the one waiting for a verdict. "Judge Hawthorne," the officer repeated. "You need to come with us. Now." The reporters rose to their feet, cameras flashing, capturing every excruciating second of his downfall. With visible effort, Hawthorne pushed himself out of his chair, the movement slow, mechanical, like he was dragging the weight of his own sins behind him. He had never been this small before. Never felt this powerless. As he descended the steps from the bench, a single slow clap echoed through the courtroom. Then another, and another, until the entire gallery was applauding. Not for him. For her. For Maya Carter. The young woman who had walked into this courtroom as a defendant, and left as the one who delivered justice. She watched as Hawthorne was escorted away, his head hanging low. Then, Without another word, she gathered her things, straightened her jacket, and walked toward the exit. The cameras followed her every step. She didn't acknowledge them. Because this wasn't about fame. This wasn't about revenge. This was about justice. And finally, after decades of corruption, justice had won. Maya Carter stepped out of the courthouse, the crisp air hitting her skin like a wake-up call. She had won. She had done what few ever dared to do. She had taken down a corrupt judge in his own courtroom. But as she descended the courthouse steps, surrounded by a swarm of reporters, flashing cameras, and a sea of voices calling her name, a single thought chilled her to the bone. This was too easy. Not that it hadn't been a fight, but Hawthorne, for all his arrogance, was just one man. And corruption like his didn't exist in isolation. The system protected people like him. The system needed people like him. So if he had fallen this easily, then someone, somewhere, had decided he was disposable. A pawn. A sacrifice. And that meant something far bigger was at play. Her phone vibrated. A blocked number. She hesitated, then answered. "Miss Carter." The voice was male. Steady. Calm in a way that made her uneasy. "You don't know me, but I know you. And I know that you're in danger." Maya's steps slowed. The reporters continued shouting, but their voices faded into white noise as her focus narrowed to the call. "Who is this?" "Someone who wants you to stay alive." Her pulse spiked. "If this is some kind of threat." "No," the voice cut in. "It's a warning." Maya glanced around, scanning the crowd. Was someone watching her? She turned away from the cameras, pressing the phone tighter against her ear. "Warning me about what?" There was a pause. Then, in a voice so low she almost missed it, the man said, "Hawthorne was just the beginning." Her breath hitched. "There are others. Bigger names. More powerful people. And now?" Another pause. "Now, they know your name too." Maya felt a cold prickle at the back of her neck. "You should leave this alone, Miss Carter. Before it's too late." And then, the line went dead. Maya lowered the phone, staring at the black screen. Her victory should have felt complete. But instead, it felt like she had just walked into something far bigger than she'd ever imagined. She turned back toward the courthouse, her mind racing. Hawthorne was gone. But the war? The war had just begun. Maya Carter stood at the edge of the courthouse steps, the echoes of the courtroom still ringing in her ears. She had won. Or at least, that's what the world thought. The judge was gone. The cameras have caught it all. The headlines would scream her name, hailing her as the young lawyer who had brought down a corrupt giant. But none of that mattered now. Not after that call. Not after the voice on the other end had uttered words that chilled her more than any cross-examination ever could. Hawthorne was just the beginning. Maya exhaled slowly, her fingers tightening around her phone. The crowd around her was celebrating. Journalists pushed closer, microphones reaching for her like outstretched hands. "Miss Carter, what's next for you? Do you believe the justice system is truly fair? Are you afraid of retaliation?" That last one made her pause. Fear? She had never thought about it before. But now, she could feel it creeping in. Not the kind of fear that comes from standing in front of a powerful judge. Not even the fear of losing a case. This was different. This was the fear of being watched. The fear of knowing that someone, somewhere, was waiting for her next move. Her eyes flicked through the crowd, searching for something, someone, that didn't belong. And then, she saw him. A man. Dressed in an impeccable black suit, standing just far enough away to not seem obvious, yet close enough that his presence felt intentional. He wasn't holding a camera. He wasn't a reporter. And he wasn't moving. Just watching. Maya felt her heart kick against her ribs. She turned back to the journalists, her face unreadable. "Justice," she said carefully, "doesn't stop at one man." The reporters nodded eagerly, scribbling her words down. But her mind was somewhere else. Somewhere darker. Because now, she had a choice to make. She could walk away. Take her win. Build a career. Become the young lawyer who had once made history, and nothing more. Or, she could go deeper. Follow the trail. Find out who else was behind this. Expose them. Destroy them. But that would mean risking everything. As she turned to leave, her phone buzzed again. Unknown number. Maya swallowed hard, then answered. "You didn't listen." It was the same voice. The same calm, steady tone. "You should have walked away, Maya." She gripped the phone, her pulse pounding. "And yet, here you are." She hesitated. Then, in a voice just as steady as his, she said, "I don't walk away." A beat of silence. Then a slow, dark chuckle. "Then I hope you're ready for what comes next." Click. The line went dead. Maya closed her eyes for just a second, feeling the weight of everything crashing down on her. She wasn't just a lawyer anymore. She was a target. And the game? The game had only just begun. Lessons from Maya Carter's fight for justice, a message for today's world. Maya Carter's story isn't just fiction, it's a reflection of real struggles happening every day in our justice system. Corruption, racial bias, and abuse of power aren't just issues of the past, they're happening right now, in courtrooms, police stations, and boardrooms across the country. So, what can we take away from this? First, never assume that power equals justice. Just because someone wears a robe, holds a title, or runs an institution doesn't mean they act in the best interest of the people. Challenge authority when necessary. Hold those in power accountable. Second, education and knowledge are weapons. Maya didn't fight with anger, she fought with facts, law, and undeniable evidence. In a world full of misinformation, it's crucial to educate ourselves, know our rights, and use the truth as a tool for change. Lastly, change doesn't happen without risk. Fighting for justice often means stepping into the fire, facing threats, opposition, and even fear. But if no one dares to challenge corruption, it continues unchecked. The question is, are we willing to stand up, like Maya, when the moment calls for it?